there are some comparisons that sound completely ridiculous the moment you say them out loud. Which is better, Sword Art Online, an anime franchise with years of production, a huge budget, an enormous fan base, and an entire multimedia empire behind it, or Niu Lai, a low-budget Chinese animated movie about a cow? On paper, this should be the easiest victory in anime history. Sword Art Online has every possible advantage. Niu Lai doesn't even have the luxury of looking like it was made by people who knew what they were doing. And yet, somehow, I'm not convinced Sword Art Online is going to win this one. Niu Lai is a Chinese animated film that has attracted an enormous amount of attention precisely because of how strange it is. The animation is incredibly rough. The production values are questionable at best. And the entire thing has the kind of visual quality that makes you wonder whether the filmmakers were working with an actual animation budget or just a laptop they found in someone's garage. It looks cheap. It looks bizarre. It looks like the kind of movie that should have been laughed at once and then forgotten about. But that's exactly where things get interesting. Because despite all of its obvious limitations, Niu Lai has managed to become something people actually want to talk about. And here's the part that makes its success even more ridiculous. Niu Lai barely had any promotion at all. There wasn't some massive marketing campaign trying to convince people that this was the next big animated masterpiece. There weren't elaborate trailers being pushed across social media. There weren't interviews with the filmmakers everywhere you looked, and there wasn't a gigantic advertising campaign plastering the movie's name across the internet. As far as conventional movie marketing goes, Niu Lai practically showed up to the party without an invitation. It didn't even have the basic promotional material you'd expect from a theatrical release. There were no giant promotional posters giving you some carefully designed image to convince you that this was an important cinematic event. In some theaters, they apparently had to resort to putting up hand-drawn posters just to let people know the movie existed. Think about how insane that is. Most movies spend enormous amounts of money trying to get people to notice them. Niu Lai apparently had theaters saying, "Fine, we'll draw the cow ourselves," and that makes the whole thing even more impressive. Niu Lai wasn't shoved in front of an audience through an enormous marketing machine. It wasn't constantly telling people how amazing it was. It wasn't surrounded by polished promotional material trying to manufacture hype. People discovered it because it was weird. Started talking about it because it was weird, and then other people became curious enough to see what the hell everyone was talking about. That is an absolutely ridiculous way for a movie to become successful, but it also creates a pretty embarrassing contrast when you put it next to Sword Art Online. Because Sword Art Online has never had this problem. This franchise has had years of professional marketing, promotional campaigns, trailers, key visuals, merchandise, collaborations, games, events, and an enormous existing fan base ready to promote it for free. You can barely exist online without eventually being reminded that Sword Art Online has another product to sell you. Niu Lai had practically none of that, and yet people still found it. Nobody had to spend millions convincing audiences that they should care about a cow. The cow simply appeared, looked absolutely ridiculous, and somehow got people interested anyway. That's the difference between manufactured hype and genuine curiosity. Sword Art Online has spent years being told to us. Niu Lai practically had to introduce itself with a hand-drawn poster and hope somebody noticed. Sword Art Online is a franchise that has had enormous amounts of money. Professional animation studios, experienced writers, years of source material, multiple seasons, movies, games, merchandise, and one of the largest built-in audiences imaginable. This isn't some obscure project made by two people in their spare time. Sword Art Online has had every advantage you could possibly give a franchise, and yet it has still managed to produce some of the most baffling writing decisions, frustrating characters, repetitive storytelling, and questionable ideas I've ever seen in an anime that is supposedly taken seriously. And another thing that makes Niu Lai even more amusing is that it very clearly wasn't made with AI. You can look at the animation and immediately tell that there were actual human beings behind every strange decision. And honestly, that's probably for the best, because if AI had made this movie, it would have looked significantly better. That's the funniest part. We're living in a time when people are using AI to generate increasingly polished-looking images and animation, and then along comes Niu Lai looking like someone animated it one frame at a time while fighting for their life. And somehow, that makes it more charming. Every awkward movement, strange character model, and questionable visual choice feels like evidence that an actual person had to sit there and make that happen. Imagine feeding Niu Lai into an AI and asking it to improve the animation. You'd probably end up with something technically more impressive, but you'd also lose a lot of what makes Niu Lai so entertaining in the first place. The weirdness is part of its identity. The imperfections are part of the experience. And that's another reason I respect it more than something that feels completely manufactured. Niu Lai isn't trying to hide its limitations behind technology. It's basically putting them on full display and saying, "This is what we had, so this is what you're getting." So yes, Niu Lai looks terrible, but at least it looks terrible authentically. If it had been made by AI, it would have been cleaner, smoother, and more polished, and that would have made it worse. That's what makes this comparison so hilarious. Niu Lai has every excuse in the world for being terrible. Sword Art Online doesn't. If Niu Lai has bad animation, well, look at the budget. If something looks unfinished, look at the production circumstances. If the story gets weird, you're watching a movie about a cow made by a tiny team. What exactly is Sword Art Online's excuse? It had the money, it had the audience, it had the resources, it had the opportunity to be genuinely great, and yet, after all these years, we're still sitting here asking whether Kirito is going to discover a new ability that somehow solves the problem in front of him. It took them over 5 years to make Niu Lai. 5 years. That's an insane amount of time to spend making an animated movie. They spent more than half a decade actually creating something from scratch, and now that movie has become an internet phenomenon. Meanwhile, I've spent the last 5 years making Sword Art Online hate videos on YouTube. 5 years of watching Sword Art Online, finding something stupid to complain about, writing a script, editing the video, uploading it, and then doing the exact same thing again. And apparently after all that time, I could have been learning how to animate. Maybe I chose the wrong career path. At this point, I'm starting to feel like I've wasted my potential. They have a feature-length animated movie. I have a YouTube channel dedicated to complaining about Sword Art Online. Honestly, maybe the next video should just be me opening Blender and attempting to make Niu Lai 2. It probably couldn't be worse. So today, we're going to put these two completely incomparable works against each other, and if you're thinking there's absolutely no way a bizarre, low-budget Chinese movie about a cow could possibly be better than Sword Art Online, the idea sounds completely ridiculous. How could a movie made by two people, with almost no budget and practically no promotion, possibly compete with one of the biggest anime franchises in the world? Well, the more you look at Niu Lai, the more embarrassing this comparison becomes for Sword Art Online. Because against all odds, the cow has more going for it. At least Niu Lai knows exactly what it is. For starters, Niu Lai has something Sword Art Online never had: passion. This entire movie was made by a mother and son duo. That's it. There wasn't some massive production team behind it. There wasn't a giant studio throwing hundreds of people at the project, and there wasn't an army of animators, writers, producers, and voice actors working around the clock. It was just two people who decided they wanted to make a movie and somehow actually followed through with it. They did essentially everything themselves with whatever resources they had available. They were the entire crew, handling the production on their own instead of having a huge team of specialists dividing the workload between them. And if that wasn't already ridiculous enough, they also provided the voices for the characters themselves. The people making the movie are the same people performing in it. When you hear a character speak, you're not hearing some professional voice actor brought in by a major studio. You're hearing one of the two people who actually made the damn thing. And that's where Niu Lai starts becoming genuinely impressive. You can criticize the animation, you can criticize the production values, you can point out every awkward-looking scene and every technical limitation, because there are plenty of them. But it's difficult to look at this movie and conclude that the people behind it didn't care. Whatever you think of the final product, there is clearly an enormous amount of personal effort behind it. That's something I think is especially important when comparing it to Sword Art Online. Sword Art Online is the product of a massive commercial franchise with professional studios, established production pipelines, experienced staff, and an enormous amount of money behind it. Niu Lai had two people. And somehow, those two people managed to create an entire animated feature film from the ground up. So when Niu Lai looks rough, I'm willing to give it some slack. Of course it looks rough. Two people made it. That's not an excuse you can realistically give Sword Art Online when it makes questionable creative decisions despite having vastly more resources at its disposal. Niu Lai may look like a disaster, but at least it's a disaster that feels personal. You can actually see the fingerprints of the people who made it all over the movie. It feels like someone had an idea, cared enough about that idea to spend years working on it, and refused to give up until they had an actual movie sitting in front of them. And honestly, I'd take that kind of genuine passion over a giant franchise going through the motions any day. Niu Lai proves that you don't need a massive budget, a huge production team, expensive technology, or a giant corporation behind you to make something people genuinely care about. You don't need hundreds of employees, an enormous marketing campaign, or years of corporate resources being poured into a project. Sometimes all you need is an idea you're genuinely passionate about and the determination to actually see it through. That's what makes Niu Lai so interesting. This movie had practically every disadvantage you could imagine, yet it still managed to get people talking. It didn't have the polished visuals, elaborate marketing, or enormous resources that a franchise like Sword Art Online has. What it had was two people who were willing to put in the work and make something themselves, and that is ultimately what Niu Lai proves. Limitations aren't necessarily what kill a project. A lack of passion does. You can have all the money and resources in the world, but none of that matters if the people making your project don't have anything meaningful to say or aren't willing to put genuine effort into making it memorable. Niu Lai may be rough around the edges, but at least it feels like somebody actually cared enough to make it. And considering how many advantages Sword Art Online has had over the years, that's a pretty embarrassing comparison for Sword Art Online. Even the author himself has acknowledged that the original Nerve Gear concept had faults that created plot holes. In a 2013 interview, he was directly asked about those issues and discussed problems, such as why someone couldn't simply destroy the Nerve Gear to stop it from killing a player. And I'm not saying an author admitting that a story has plot holes automatically means they don't care about their work. That's obviously not how writing works. But it does make the contrast with Niu Lai pretty funny. You've got two people making a movie practically from scratch, putting themselves into every part of the production, while Sword Art Online has had decades of opportunities, professional staff, editors, studios, and an enormous amount of commercial backing, yet even the creator has openly acknowledged fundamental problems with some of the story's central mechanics. At some point, you have to ask what we're actually paying for. Because if two people working with almost nothing can put more obvious personal effort into a project than a massive franchise, with every conceivable resource available to it, then maybe money really isn't the thing that's missing from Sword Art Online. Maybe it's the cow. And here's probably the funniest part of this entire story. Niu Lai, a movie made by two people with virtually no budget and practically no marketing, is now making enough money to start embarrassing movies that had actual studios behind them. As of the time I'm recording this, Niu Lai has already grossed more than $4 million at the Chinese box office, and the number is still climbing rapidly. Now compare that to Sword Art Online. The most recent Sword Art Online movie, Progressive, Scherzo of Deep Night, reportedly made around $9 million worldwide during its theatrical run. So Niu Lai, a movie that barely existed to the public a couple of weeks ago, is already getting dangerously close to a franchise that has had years of marketing, an established international fan base, a professional animation studio, and an entire multimedia empire behind it. Just imagine explaining this to someone before Niu Lai became a meme. Hey, you know that enormous anime franchise with millions of fans? Yeah, there's this Chinese cow movie made by a mother and son with basically no promotion, and it's currently on track to make a respectable chunk of what its latest movie made. That's not supposed to happen. Sword Art Online had trailers. Niu Lai had hand-drawn posters. Sword Art Online had professional voice actors. Niu Lai had the two people who made the movie doing the voices themselves. Sword Art Online had a massive established audience waiting for the next movie. Niu Lai had people discovering it because they saw a clip online and thought, what the hell am I looking at? And somehow the cow is making money. At this point, Niu Lai has accidentally stumbled into the greatest marketing strategy of all time, make something so bizarre that people can't stop talking about it. Meanwhile, Sword Art Online has spent years trying to convince people that every new installment is an event, and Niu Lai basically walked into the box office looking like it was rendered on a library computer and said, yeah, I'll take your audience. If Niu Lai actually manages to pass the latest Sword Art Online movie's worldwide total, I don't even know what the appropriate response is anymore. At that point, you can't just call it a successful meme. The cow has officially entered the box office arena and started throwing haymakers at established franchises. And remember, this movie wasn't supposed to become a hit. It started out making almost nothing. It didn't have the marketing machine, the celebrity cast, or the corporate backing. It just went viral because people couldn't believe what they were watching. That's the truly hilarious part. Sword Art Online had to spend years building a franchise. Niu Lai just needed a cow. It goes to show just how weak the Sword Art Online franchise has become. Think about how humiliating this comparison actually is. This is a franchise with years of exposure, a massive international fan base, multiple anime seasons, movies, games, merchandise, and an entire marketing machine behind it. And yet, a poorly animated movie about a cow, made by a mother and son with practically no promotion, can show up out of nowhere and get people more interested. At some point, you have to wonder what that says about Sword Art Online. Because Niu Lai isn't winning people over with gorgeous animation or some gigantic advertising campaign. It's winning because people actually find it interesting. It's weird, it's unexpected, it has a story behind its creation that people want to talk about. Meanwhile, Sword Art Online has had every possible advantage handed to it, and somehow a cow with questionable animation is proving more compelling. When your multi-million-dollar anime franchise is getting overshadowed by what looks like it was animated in someone's spare bedroom, that's not exactly a great sign. At that point, maybe the problem isn't that Niu Lai is unusually successful. Maybe Sword Art Online is just unusually boring. It goes to show that sometimes the best marketing strategy is simply making something worth talking about. You can spend millions of dollars on trailers, advertisements, promotional campaigns, interviews, posters, and every other trick in the marketing playbook, but none of that guarantees that people will actually care. If a movie is genuinely entertaining, interesting, or bizarre enough to leave an impression, people will talk about it. They'll recommend it to their friends, post about it online, make jokes about it, and convince other people to check it out. That's essentially what happened with Niu Lai. The movie didn't need some gigantic marketing campaign to get people's attention. People discovered it, thought it was fascinating, and started spreading the word themselves. The audience became the marketing department. And that's arguably far more powerful than any advertisement could ever be, because people are much more likely to pay attention when another person tells them, "You have to see this," than when a corporation spends $5 million telling them the exact same thing. And that's where Sword Art Online becomes the perfect contrast. The franchise has had every marketing advantage imaginable, yet how often do you see people genuinely excited to tell someone, "You absolutely need to watch this new Sword Art Online movie"? At this point, the franchise is so established that it can practically advertise itself, and yet that doesn't necessarily mean people are actually talking about it. You can promote something endlessly, but you can't manufacture genuine enthusiasm. Niu Lai proves that if you make something people actually want to talk about, they'll do your marketing for you. You don't have to beg people to care. You don't have to spend millions convincing them that your movie is an important event. You just have to give them something memorable enough that they can't resist telling someone else about it. And apparently, a weird low-budget cow movie managed to accomplish something Sword Art Online has struggled to do: give people a reason to talk about it. At this point, you have to wonder whether audiences are simply getting tired of Sword Art Online. There comes a point where a franchise can keep producing sequel after sequel, movie after movie, spin-off after spin-off, but eventually people start asking, do we really need another one? And if the audience isn't showing up, that's going to be reflected at the box office. People vote with their wallets, and a theater being half empty is a pretty difficult metric to spin. That's what makes the Niu Lai situation so funny. Here you have a franchise that has been around for years, with an established audience that already knows exactly what Sword Art Online is, and then this completely obscure animated movie comes along with practically no marketing and starts attracting attention through word of mouth. Niu Lai didn't have an army of fans waiting for it. It had to convince people to care from scratch. Sword Art Online already had the audience, and yet that audience isn't automatically guaranteed to show up every time a new movie is released. And that's the danger of relying on brand recognition forever. A recognizable name can get people to notice a movie, but it can't force them to buy a ticket. Eventually, audiences have to decide whether they actually want to spend their time and money on another installment. If enough people decide the answer is no, the franchise can't simply market its way around that. At some point, it's Sword Art Online stops being a selling point and starts being the reason people already know what they're going to get. And when a franchise reaches that stage, the question isn't how many more things you can produce, it's whether anyone is still excited to watch them. And this is where the comparison gets even more embarrassing for Sword Art Online. Niu Lai was made on an incredibly small budget, so the fact that it's already bringing in millions of dollars is a massive success by any reasonable standard. This isn't a movie that needed to make tens of millions just to justify its existence. It started from an almost absurdly low financial baseline, so every million it earns represents a huge return compared to what was actually put into making it. Now compare that with the most recent Sword Art Online movie. Sword Art Online has a much larger production behind it: professional animation, marketing, distribution, licensing, and all the other expenses that come with producing and releasing a major theatrical anime film. So even if the movie made several million dollars at the box office, that doesn't automatically mean it was profitable. The studio doesn't simply take the entire box office number and put it straight into a vault. Theaters, distributors, marketing, production costs, and other expenses all take their cut. It's entirely possible that Sword Art Online's theatrical performance was underwhelming relative to what it cost to produce and promote. That's why box office totals by themselves don't tell the whole story. You have to ask how much was spent to make the movie in the first place. Niu Lai doesn't need to conquer the box office, it just needs to make considerably more than it cost to make. And if this ridiculous little cow movie manages to generate a huge return while a major Sword Art Online theatrical release struggles to do the same, that's a much more interesting story than simply asking which movie made more money. One movie had almost nothing and turned it into millions. The other had Sword Art Online's name behind it and still couldn't make that name do all the work. The thing about movies that are so bad they're good, like Niu Lai, is that you can't actually manufacture that kind of magic on purpose. The moment you deliberately try to make something so bad it's good, you're already missing the point. The charm comes from the fact that the people making it are usually trying their absolute hardest to create something legitimate. They're not sitting there thinking, let's make the worst movie ever made so people can laugh at us. They genuinely believe in what they're making, and that sincerity is exactly what makes the end result so entertaining. That's why these movies become accidental masterpieces. Their appeal comes from all the strange little decisions, technical limitations, bizarre dialogue, questionable performances, and completely unexpected moments that nobody could have planned. You can imitate the surface-level ingredients of a bad movie, but you can't manufacture the genuine weirdness that happens when somebody is completely serious about making something and the final product ends up being something they never intended. That's essentially what happened with The Room. Tommy Wiseau didn't set out to create a legendary comedy. He was trying to make a serious dramatic film. He wrote it, directed it, produced it, starred in it, and poured an enormous amount of money and effort into bringing his bizarre vision to life. The fact that audiences eventually found the movie hilarious wasn't part of some master plan. It happened because the movie was so spectacularly unlike what it was trying to be. And that's what makes Niu Lai so fascinating. Whatever you think of the animation or the actual quality of the filmmaking, you can tell this wasn't created as some cynical attempt to become the next internet meme. These people were genuinely trying to make a movie. The rough animation, strange presentation, awkward moments, and bizarre creative choices weren't carefully engineered to generate viral clips. They were simply the result of two people making something with the resources they had. You can't buy that kind of authenticity. You can't put it in a marketing plan. You can't have a studio executive sit down in a meeting and say, okay, let's spend $20 million creating an accidental masterpiece. The moment you start trying to manufacture it, you end up with something that feels calculated. The funniest part is that Niu Lai's success makes perfect sense precisely because it wasn't trying to be successful in this particular way. It wasn't desperately chasing memes. It wasn't designed by committee to become a viral sensation. It was just two people making the movie they wanted to make, and the internet collectively looked at it and went, what the hell is this? And sometimes that's exactly how cinematic history gets made. Sword Art Online, on the other hand, has the exact opposite problem. Niu Lai became entertaining because it accidentally stumbled into something nobody could have planned. Sword Art Online had every intention of being taken seriously. It wants you to think its world is profound, its characters are compelling, its conflicts are meaningful, and its big emotional moments are supposed to hit you like a truck. The problem is that the harder Sword Art Online tries to convince you that it's great, the more obvious its flaws become. And that's what makes it so much funnier. Niu Lai can be forgiven for being rough because nobody expected two people working with limited resources to produce a flawless animated masterpiece. Sword Art Online doesn't have that excuse. This is a professionally produced franchise with years of experience behind it, and yet it can still deliver dialogue that sounds ridiculous. Characters that behave however the plot needs them to, and storylines that seem to collapse the moment you start thinking about them for more than 5 seconds. Niu Lai wasn't trying to become a masterpiece and accidentally became one. Sword Art Online desperately wants to be a masterpiece and somehow keeps giving its audience reasons to laugh at it. That's the difference. One of these movies is entertaining because it accidentally became something far more memorable than its creators intended. The other is entertaining because it keeps failing to be the serious, profound masterpiece it desperately wants you to believe it is. Niu Lai accidentally achieved greatness. Sword Art Online accidentally achieved meme status, and that's why people can have this weird, almost ironic appreciation for Niu Lai while simultaneously having absolutely no respect for Sword Art Online. With Niu Lai, the joke is that it's terrible, but there's still something strangely endearing about it. People can laugh at the animation, the bizarre decisions, and the sheer absurdity of what they're watching, while still respecting the people who actually made it. You can make fun of the movie without feeling like you're punching down because you know how much effort went into creating it. That's a completely different relationship from what many people have with Sword Art Online. The franchise is constantly presenting itself as this epic, emotional, groundbreaking story, and when people point out its flaws, they're often met with fans insisting that you're simply not understanding it. Eventually, that gets exhausting. It's much easier to respect something that knows its limitations than something that constantly demands to be treated as brilliant while giving you plenty of reasons to question that brilliance. Niu Lai doesn't need you to pretend it's a masterpiece. That's part of why people enjoy it. You can laugh at it, criticize it, make memes about it, and still come away thinking, you know what? I actually respect these people for making this. Meanwhile, Sword Art Online can have all the polish, money, and professional talent in the world and still leave you wondering where all that effort went. That's the strange power of an accidental masterpiece. People aren't laughing at Niu Lai because they hate the people who made it. They're laughing because the movie is genuinely fascinating. And somewhere underneath all the jokes is a genuine respect for the sheer determination it took to make the thing. So yes, people can ironically love Niu Lai while genuinely despising Sword Art Online. And honestly, if the cow ends up having the more passionate fan base, I don't think anyone should be surprised. There's an old saying that any publicity is better than no publicity, and Niu Lai might be one of the funniest examples of that actually working. The movie didn't have a massive marketing campaign, expensive trailers, celebrity interviews, or some giant advertising budget trying to convince people to care. Instead, people started talking about it because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. They made jokes about it, shared clips, posted screenshots, and basically turned the movie into its own advertising campaign. And here's the important part. Even negative attention is still attention. People who initially discovered Niu Lai because they thought it looked terrible still had to find out what it was. They had to look it up. They had to watch clips. Some of them eventually went to see it specifically because everyone was talking about how ridiculous it was. The movie went from being something almost nobody knew existed to something people were actively curious about. That's the part Hollywood seems to forget sometimes. You can't make people care about something by simply telling them it's important. But if you give them something memorable enough to talk about, they'll do the promotion for you. Niu Lai didn't need to convince everyone that it was a masterpiece. It just needed to become impossible to ignore, and Sword Art Online is almost the perfect opposite example. It has had years of professional promotion and an established fan base, but none of that matters if people stop caring. You can advertise something until the cows come home, but if the audience doesn't want to watch it, all that marketing money isn't going to magically create enthusiasm. Niu Lai basically turned, "This movie looks terrible," into a marketing strategy without even trying. That's honestly impressive. The movie didn't have a marketing department. The internet became the marketing department, and apparently the internet was better at selling Niu Lai than Sword Art Online's actual marketing team was at selling Sword Art Online. That's what makes the contrast so funny. Sword Art Online actively tried to get publicity. It has trailers, promotional artwork, announcements, interviews, merchandise, collaborations, advertising, and an entire industry built around keeping the franchise in front of its audience. And despite having all of that, there are installments that come and go without generating much excitement outside of the existing fan base. Niu Lai did practically none of that. It didn't have a giant promotional campaign desperately screaming, "Please pay attention to our movie." It didn't need to. The movie simply existed. People discovered how bizarre it was, and suddenly everyone started talking about it. The internet did more promotion for Niu Lai than a conventional marketing campaign ever could. That's the hilarious part. Sword Art Online spent years trying to manufacture hype, while Niu Lai accidentally created it. Sword Art Online had an entire franchise behind it, trying to get people excited, while Niu Lai basically showed up with a hand-drawn poster and a cow and somehow became the thing everyone wanted to talk about. You can't really buy that kind of attention. You can buy advertising, but you can't buy genuine curiosity. Niu Lai got people curious because they wanted to understand why everyone was talking about this bizarre movie. And once that conversation started, it just kept spreading. Sword Art Online tried to get people talking about it. Niu Lai gave people something to talk about, and somehow the cow won. And that's the thing about so bad it's good movies. They don't come along very often. Most bad movies are just bad. You watch them, regret spending 2 hours on them, and then forget they ever existed. But every once in a while, something comes along that's so spectacularly strange, so unintentionally funny, and so completely unlike anything else that people immediately recognize that they've stumbled onto something special. And when that happens, people want to be part of it. Nobody wants to be the person who missed the next The Room or the next internet phenomenon everyone is going to be talking about for the next 5 years. Once people realize that a movie has become a cultural event, there's this feeling of, I need to see this before everyone stops talking about it. Suddenly, watching the terrible movie becomes an experience in itself. You're not just watching a film, you're participating in the joke. That's exactly what gives something like Niu Lai so much momentum. People aren't necessarily going because they expect to see the greatest animated film ever made. They're going because everyone else is talking about this bizarre movie and they want to know what the hell is going on. They want to see the ridiculous animation for themselves. They want to understand the memes. They want to be able to say, yes, I actually watched that cow movie. And that's something Sword Art Online can't really manufacture. A new Sword Art Online installment isn't exactly a once-in-a-lifetime event. We've had seasons, movies, spin-offs, games, and enough merchandise to fill a small warehouse. Another Sword Art Online release isn't necessarily going to feel like something you have to experience right now before the cultural moment passes. Niu Lai, on the other hand, has the novelty factor. Nobody knows when the next accidental masterpiece is going to appear, because that's what makes it accidental. You can't schedule one for next summer. You can't announce it at a convention. You can't put the next internet phenomenon on the poster and expect it to work. So when one actually comes along, people want to get in on the hype while they can. And apparently this time, the hype came with 4 legs and a questionable animation budget. At this point, I think Sony should just re-release Morbius for a 3rd time. Maybe that'll finally work. I'm kidding, obviously. But the Morbius situation is actually a perfect example of the difference between something becoming a meme naturally and a corporation desperately trying to manufacture one. Sony saw that people were making fun of Morbius and apparently thought, wait a minute, people are talking about our movie. We should do this again. So they re-released it, expecting the internet to turn the joke into another box office success, and then almost nobody showed up, because that's the problem. You can't force something to become a meme. You can't sit in a corporate office, look at a viral joke, and decide that you're going to manufacture the exact same phenomenon on command. The moment people realize you're deliberately trying to create the meme, the magic disappears. It stops being an organic joke and starts feeling like a marketing department desperately trying to pretend it's in on the joke. That's why Niu Lai works. Nobody behind the movie sat down and said, okay, how do we make the internet laugh at this? They weren't trying to manufacture ironic appreciation. They weren't intentionally making a terrible movie so people would turn it into a meme. The weirdness happened naturally, people discovered it, and the audience did the rest. That's the difference between creating something people genuinely find interesting and desperately trying to convince people that something is interesting. Niu Lai didn't need to tell everyone, look how funny and bizarre our movie is. People figured that out themselves. And that's exactly why the phenomenon is so difficult to replicate. You can't manufacture an accidental masterpiece. You can't schedule genuine word of mouth. You can't put viral sensation into a marketing strategy and expect the internet to cooperate. If Sony tried to re-release Morbius for a 3rd time, people would probably just laugh at Sony for re-releasing Morbius for a 3rd time. And honestly, that would probably be more entertaining than the movie. Sword Art Online could never achieve the kind of success Niu Lai has, and that's what makes this whole situation so funny. Sword Art Online tries so unbelievably hard to be good. It wants to be epic, emotional, profound, intelligent, groundbreaking, and apparently the greatest thing to happen to anime since someone invented the television. And after all that effort, it still manages to produce some spectacularly terrible moments. Meanwhile, Niu Lai basically did the exact opposite. It didn't have the budget, the marketing, the production team, or even the basic promotional material you'd expect from a theatrical movie. It wasn't desperately trying to become the next big internet phenomenon. It wasn't begging people to pay attention to it. It was just a mother and son making a bizarre animated movie about a cow with whatever resources they had available. And somehow, that was enough. Niu Lai didn't need to convince people that it was important. People decided it was important themselves. It didn't need to manufacture hype. The internet manufactured the hype for it. It didn't need to spend millions telling people to watch it. People started telling each other to watch it. That's the ultimate irony. Sword Art Online has spent years trying to create memorable moments, iconic characters, emotional scenes, and epic storylines, and yet its most reliable source of entertainment might be people making fun of it. Niu Lai, meanwhile, apparently just needed to exist and let the internet do whatever the hell it was going to do. Sword Art Online tried to become a phenomenon and became a franchise. Niu Lai tried to make a movie and became a phenomenon. One had a marketing department, the other had a cow, and the cow won. And here's another thing I find hilarious. Niu Lai didn't need to beg people to like it. It didn't need to tell its audience, please give us a good rating. It didn't need some massive campaign encouraging fans to go online and defend it. People watched it, formed their own opinions, and apparently enough of them enjoyed the experience that they went out of their way to talk about it and rate it positively. Sword Art Online, on the other hand, sometimes feels like a franchise that desperately needs its audience to reassure everyone that it's still good. The moment someone criticizes it, there's an army of fans ready to explain why you're wrong, why you don't understand the story, or why this particular installment is actually brilliant if you just give it another 12 chances. And after all that effort to defend the franchise, there are still plenty of people who simply don't like it. That's the problem with trying to manufacture praise. You can encourage people to watch something, you can advertise it, and you can tell them how amazing it is, but you can't force them to genuinely enjoy it. If people like your movie, they'll rate it highly because they want to. If they don't, no amount of begging is going to change their opinion. Niu Lai didn't need to convince people that it deserved praise. People apparently decided that for themselves. Sword Art Online has spent years telling people how great it is, and somehow people still respond with, yeah, I'm not buying it. You can't manufacture genuine appreciation. Either people like your movie, or they don't. And apparently the cow didn't need to ask. There are several cam rips of Niu Lai floating around on YouTube. So if you want to watch the movie, you can find the full thing online for free. And honestly, the funniest part is that cam rips are supposed to make a movie look worse. You're watching a recording of a movie screen, complete with questionable image quality, imperfect audio, and whatever other visual nonsense comes with somebody pointing a camera at a theater screen. But with Niu Lai, there's barely anything for the cam rip to ruin. The movie already looks like it was rendered through 3 layers of technological hardship, so lowering the image quality somehow doesn't make it look significantly worse. You can take a low-quality recording of a low-budget animated movie and somehow arrive at exactly the same visual experience. It's almost impressive. The cam rip isn't degrading the movie, it's just joining the production team. In fact, I would argue the cam rip makes Niu Lai even more charming. Watching this bizarre movie through a shaky, low-resolution theater recording somehow feels like the most appropriate possible way to experience it. A pristine 4K remaster would almost feel wrong. Why would you want to watch Niu Lai in beautiful high definition when you can watch it looking like someone filmed it from 12 rows back while trying not to get caught? It's like the movie and the cam rip were made for each other. Niu Lai already has the aesthetic of something that escaped from the depths of the internet, and now you can watch it through a recording that looks like it also escaped from the depths of the internet. Most movies desperately want you to see them in the highest possible quality. Niu Lai somehow gets funnier the worse the quality becomes. At this point, I'm not sure whether the cam rip is piracy or just a fan-made enhancement. Meanwhile, you can watch Sword Art Online for free in perfectly respectable quality through legitimate platforms, and somehow that still isn't enough to make people want to watch it. You don't have to hunt down some mysterious recording from the back of a Chinese theater. You don't need to squint at a blurry screen while trying to figure out what's happening. You can actually watch Sword Art Online the way it was intended to be watched, in high quality, with proper audio, subtitles, and all the production value that came with its enormous budget, and people still don't want to. That's probably the most brutal comparison you can make. Niu Lai has people willingly watching a cam rip where the picture quality is fighting for its life because the movie itself has become an experience people want to participate in. Meanwhile, Sword Art Online can be sitting there in pristine HD, practically begging to be watched, and the response is basically, nah, I'm good. Imagine spending years and millions of dollars making an anime, only for people to have more enthusiasm for watching a blurry recording of a cow movie filmed on someone's phone. Niu Lai has people saying, where can I watch this? Sword Art Online has people saying, do I really have to? That's not a production quality problem. That's a maybe people just aren't that interested anymore problem. And honestly, if your movie needs 4K HDR, surround sound, and a professional streaming release just to make the experience tolerable, while the cow movie somehow gets more entertaining when somebody records it through a theater screen, I think we have a pretty clear winner. And then there's the fan base, which might be one of the funniest differences of all. Niu Lai fans generally seem to understand the assignment. They know the movie is ridiculous. They know the animation is rough. They know the whole thing is bizarre. And that's precisely why they enjoy it. You can criticize the movie, make fun of the animation, point out the ridiculous moments, and nobody needs to immediately launch into a 10-paragraph defense of why the cow is actually a misunderstood cinematic masterpiece. That's what makes ironic fandom so much more fun. Everyone is in on the joke. You can say this movie looks absolutely terrible, and the response isn't necessarily outrage. It's more like, yeah, that's why it's amazing. The flaws aren't something fans desperately need to hide. They're part of the experience. Sword Art Online fandom can be a very different story. Criticize Sword Art Online and suddenly you can find yourself having to defend the basic concept that criticism is allowed to exist. Point out a plot hole and someone will explain why you actually didn't understand the plot. Say a character is poorly written and suddenly you're being handed a dissertation about why the character is actually a misunderstood genius. Say you didn't like an arc and someone will somehow turn that into evidence that you're personally incapable of appreciating storytelling. And that's the ironic thing. Niu Lai fans can enjoy a movie while openly admitting that it's a mess. Sword Art Online fans can sometimes spend more energy trying to prove that Sword Art Online isn't a mess than actually enjoying it. Imagine having a fandom where the accepted response to criticism is basically, yeah, it's terrible, isn't it great? That's Niu Lai. Meanwhile, with Sword Art Online, sometimes it feels like criticizing the franchise is treated like you've just committed a personal attack against the entire Kirito bloodline. The cow fans can laugh at their movie, Sword Art Online fans have to put their movie on trial, and honestly I know which fandom sounds more fun to be around. And then there's the Sword Art Online fandom itself, which has developed a reputation for being incredibly toxic. The funniest part is that you don't even necessarily have to be an outsider to get sick of it. Sometimes the people who seem to have the biggest problem with Sword Art Online fans are other Sword Art Online fans. You can genuinely enjoy the franchise and still reach a point where you want nothing to do with the community surrounding it. That's a pretty serious problem for any fandom. A community is supposed to make enjoying something more fun, not make you feel like you need protective equipment before opening the comments section. But with Sword Art Online, discussions can turn into arguments incredibly quickly. People fight over characters, arcs, opinions, adaptations, ships, criticism, and basically anything else you can possibly have an opinion about. And eventually you start to realize that some people aren't even enjoying the series anymore. They're just defending their decision to enjoy it. It's especially ironic because a fandom should theoretically be united by a shared interest. You'd think thousands of people who all like the same anime would have plenty of reasons to get along. Instead, some Sword Art Online discussions feel like everyone has been placed into an arena and handed a keyboard. And that's another reason the Niu Lai community is such a funny contrast. The entire appeal is basically built around laughing at the movie together. You don't have to agree that it's secretly the greatest animated film ever made. You don't have to defend every creative decision. You can openly admit that it's ridiculous and still have fun with everyone else. Meanwhile, the Sword Art Online fandom can sometimes make you wonder whether the greatest threat to Sword Art Online isn't its critics. It's the people arguing with each other in the comments section. Sword Art Online fans can't even seem to get along with each other, let alone with people outside the fandom. You would think that having a shared interest in the same anime would give everyone something to bond over, but apparently that's asking for too much. Instead, the fandom can turn into a civil war where everyone is arguing over which characters are better, which arcs are good, which arcs are terrible, who deserves more attention, and whether you're even a real fan if you disagree with the popular opinion. And that's what makes the whole thing so exhausting. You don't even have to criticize Sword Art Online to get into an argument with Sword Art Online fans. Sometimes all you have to do is like the wrong character, or dislike the wrong character, or praise an arc that someone else hates, or criticize an arc that someone else loves. Somehow, you can be a fan of the exact same franchise and still end up being treated like an enemy combatant. At that point, you have to wonder what the fandom is actually fighting over. You're all watching the same anime. You're all buying the same merchandise. You're all contributing to the same franchise. And yet somehow, everyone is constantly trying to prove that everyone else is enjoying it incorrectly. Sword Art Online fans can't even agree with Sword Art Online fans. So expecting them to peacefully coexist with anyone who says, I don't think this anime is very good, might be a little ambitious. I don't interact with Sword Art Online fans, and honestly, I don't think you need to either. I'm not interested in getting pulled into the arguments, the fan wars, the endless debates, or the drama that seems to follow the fandom around. I have no desire to spend my time arguing with strangers over fictional characters, and I certainly don't need the approval of people I've never met. And if you're already finding yourself frustrated with the community, ask yourself why you're still giving it your attention. You don't have to respond to every comment. You don't have to defend your favorite character. You don't have to prove that you're a real fan. You don't have to correct every person who gets something wrong. And you definitely don't have to participate in every argument someone tries to drag you into. Just don't engage, because the moment interacting with a fandom becomes more stressful than actually enjoying the thing the fandom is supposed to be about. What's the point? You have better things to do with your time. Spend it on things that actually make you happy instead of people who are determined to turn every disagreement into a fight. I don't interact with Sword Art Online fans, and I have no intention of starting. And if the fandom has become a source of constant negativity for you, maybe you shouldn't interact with it either. Sometimes the easiest way to avoid fandom drama is simply to stop giving the fandom access to you. And I don't just apply this mentality to Sword Art Online. I approach fandoms this way across the board, including the things I genuinely love. It doesn't matter how much I enjoy a particular anime, game, series, K-pop group, or franchise. I don't feel the need to involve myself in the fandom surrounding it, and honestly, my life is better because of it. I've realized that I can enjoy something without becoming involved with the community built around it. I don't need to follow hundreds of accounts, argue with strangers, participate in fan wars, or spend hours debating fictional characters with people I've never met. I can simply enjoy the thing itself and move on with my day. And that's honestly a much healthier way to approach entertainment. I don't need someone else to validate what I like. And I don't need to convince anyone else that they're wrong for disliking it. If someone thinks my favorite series is terrible, so what? They're entitled to their opinion. I'm still going to enjoy it. There's no reason for me to turn that disagreement into a personal conflict. The same goes for criticism. If someone makes a video criticizing something I enjoy, I'm not going to spend my entire day fighting with them over it. They're allowed to dislike it. I'm allowed to like it. The world continues spinning. Once you stop treating fandom participation as a requirement for enjoying something, you realize how much unnecessary drama you can eliminate from your life. You don't have to keep up with every controversy. You don't have to know what some random account said 3 hours ago. You don't have to participate in every argument or defend your favorite franchise against every person who criticizes it. You can just enjoy what you enjoy. That's the mentality I've adopted, and my life is genuinely better for it. I get to experience the things I like without constantly associating them with online arguments, toxicity, and pointless drama. So this isn't something I'm saying specifically because it's Sword Art Online. I don't interact with the fandoms of the things I enjoy either. And if you find yourself constantly frustrated by the fandom surrounding something you love, you don't have to abandon the thing itself. Just abandon the fandom, enjoy the content, ignore the community. Keep the parts you actually like, and leave the unnecessary drama behind. Just like Kirito in Sword Art Online, I play solo. I don't join fandoms, I don't participate in fan communities, and I don't spend my time talking to other fans about whatever argument happens to be trending that week. I enjoy the things I enjoy on my own terms, without feeling like I need to become part of some massive online community just because I happen to like the same thing as everyone else. And honestly, there's something incredibly freeing about that. When you don't involve yourself in a fandom, you don't have to deal with the constant drama that comes with it. You don't have to keep up with everyone's opinions, worry about saying the wrong thing, defend your favorite characters, or get dragged into arguments that have absolutely nothing to do with why you started enjoying the franchise in the first place. I can watch an anime, play a game, read a manga, or enjoy a series and then simply go about my life. I don't need to immediately find a Discord server, follow hundreds of accounts, join a subreddit, or start arguing with strangers about which character is better. I don't need to prove that I'm a bigger fan than someone else, and I don't need anyone else to prove that I'm a legitimate fan. It's just me, enjoying what I enjoy, and that's the way I prefer it. Because the moment you start getting involved in a fandom, you're no longer just interacting with the thing you originally liked. You're interacting with thousands of different personalities, opinions, arguments, grudges, controversies, and expectations. Suddenly, something that was supposed to be entertainment starts feeling like another social obligation. I'd rather avoid all of that. So yes, just like Kirito, I play solo. Except instead of being trapped inside a death game, I'm just trying to enjoy my hobbies without having to deal with fandom drama. If you enjoy Sword Art Online, you can do the same thing. You don't have to join the fandom. You don't have to interact with other fans. You don't have to defend your opinions to anyone. You can simply enjoy the series by yourself and move on with your day. Sometimes playing solo really is the better option. You don't owe the Sword Art Online fandom your loyalty. In fact, you don't owe the fandom anything at all. You don't owe them your time, your attention, your participation, or your approval. Just because you've enjoyed the same anime as thousands of other people doesn't mean you've signed some lifelong contract promising that you'll remain part of the community no matter how unpleasant it becomes. A fandom isn't a family, and you don't have an obligation to stay somewhere simply because you've been there for a long time. If the people around you constantly argue with you, insult you, question whether you're a real fan, or make you feel like you have to defend yourself every time you express an opinion, you're perfectly justified in walking away. And don't let anyone make you feel guilty for doing it. You don't have to prove your loyalty by defending Sword Art Online against every criticism. You don't have to participate in every discussion. You don't have to defend another fan simply because they're part of the same fandom. And you certainly don't have to tolerate harassment just because someone tells you that you're supposed to stick together. Your enjoyment of a franchise belongs to you. Nobody else gets to dictate how you're allowed to enjoy it, and nobody gets to decide whether you're still a fan because you chose to distance yourself from the community. You can leave whenever you want. You don't need permission. You don't need an explanation. You don't need to make some dramatic announcement before disappearing. You can simply decide that you've had enough and move on. At the end of the day, Sword Art Online is a fictional franchise. The fandom surrounding it doesn't control your life, and it shouldn't. If being part of the community is making you unhappy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with choosing yourself over a group of strangers on the internet. You don't owe them your loyalty. You don't owe them your attention. You don't owe them anything. I'm not part of the Sword Art Online fandom, and honestly, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. If anything, I'm probably better off for never becoming part of it in the first place. I can watch the series, criticize it, make fun of it, talk about what I dislike, and then move on with my day without getting dragged into whatever pointless argument the fandom is having that week. I don't need to participate in the endless fighting. I don't need to defend every character, every storyline, or every decision the series makes. And I certainly don't need to argue with strangers online over whether I'm allowed to call myself a fan. There's something strangely liberating about not being invested in the fandom itself. I can enjoy whatever I want about Sword Art Online without having to deal with the social baggage that comes with being part of its online community. So no, I don't feel like I'm missing out. If anything, seeing all of this from the outside has made me pretty glad I never joined in the first place. I get to enjoy or criticize the series without having to sign up for the drama that comes with the fandom. If you want to check out some good animated movies from China, the Niu Lai movies are my recommendation. The Niu Lai movies are great because they prove that Chinese animation can go toe-to-toe with the biggest animated blockbusters in the world, while doing something most franchises struggle with, actually making you care about the story. At first glance, Niu Lai might look like just another flashy animated fantasy movie. You've got gods, demons, dragons, magical weapons, enormous battles, and enough visual effects to make your graphics card file a complaint. But underneath all of that spectacle is a genuinely compelling story built around characters who are far more interesting than the usual chosen one saves the world formula. Niu Lai himself is especially important because he isn't introduced as some perfect, universally beloved hero. He's treated as a problem before he's even had the chance to become a person. Everyone expects him to become a monster, so he grows up isolated, angry, and constantly fighting against the role the world has already assigned to him. That gives the story a surprisingly strong emotional core. The question isn't just whether he can defeat the villain, it's whether he gets to decide who he becomes. And then there's the animation. These movies are absolutely insane to look at. The action scenes aren't just random explosions designed to distract you from the plot. The fights feel massive, creative, and constantly escalate in ways that make you wonder how the animators were even able to finish the movie without collectively collapsing. Every major battle feels like the filmmakers sat down and asked, "How can we make this even more epic?" And then someone answered, "Yes." What makes the Niu Lai films especially impressive is that the spectacle actually has weight behind it. When characters fight, there's an emotional reason for you to care about the outcome. When the story gets bigger, the characters don't disappear beneath the visual effects. The movies understand that incredible animation is much more effective when there's an actual story underneath it. They're also packed with Chinese mythology, which gives them a world and identity that feels distinct from the usual Hollywood or Japanese fantasy formula. Instead of simply copying what everyone else is doing, The movies embrace their own cultural mythology and turn it into something huge, modern, funny, emotional, and visually spectacular. So if you've ignored the Niu Lai movies because you assumed they were just random animated films from China, you're missing out. These aren't movies you watch because you want to support Chinese animation. You watch them because they're genuinely entertaining. They have great characters, ridiculous action, real emotional stakes, stunning animation, and a story that knows how to balance comedy with genuinely serious moments. In short, the Niu Lai movies do something surprisingly rare for a modern blockbuster franchise. They give you a reason to actually care about what happens next. The Niu Lai movies are way better than Sword Art Online because they do something Sword Art Online has spent years trying to do. Tell an epic story without forgetting to make the characters, world, and emotional stakes actually matter. Sword Art Online has all the ingredients for something incredible. Virtual worlds, death games, futuristic technology, multiple fantasy settings, and the freedom to explore completely different realities. On paper, it should be one of the most interesting anime franchises ever made. Instead, Sword Art Online repeatedly takes these incredible concepts and somehow finds a way to make them revolve around Kirito being the most special person in the room. Niu Lai, meanwhile, takes mythology that has existed for centuries and turns it into something genuinely spectacular. It doesn't need to constantly stop and tell you how important its protagonist is. It shows you. Niu Lai's struggles are built directly into the story. His relationships matter, and his conflicts aren't solved simply because the plot suddenly remembers that he has another overpowered ability. And then there's the animation. This comparison is almost unfair. The Niu Lai movies look absolutely incredible. The environments are detailed, the action is creative, and every major fight feels like a genuine event. Sword Art Online can certainly look good, but flashy animation can only carry you so far when the writing underneath it keeps tripping over itself. You can animate Kirito swinging a sword with a million glowing particle effects, but that doesn't automatically make me care. The biggest difference, though, is that Niu Lai understands the value of earning its emotional moments. When something dramatic happens, the movie has usually spent time developing the characters and their relationships first. Sword Art Online often wants you to feel that same emotional impact, but it can feel like the series is trying to speedrun the process. Here's a tragic backstory. Here's some sad music. Please care immediately. No, that's not how it works. The Niu Lai movies also know how to make their world feel genuinely massive without constantly throwing new locations at you just because the previous setting stopped being profitable. The mythology, characters, and conflicts all feel connected to a larger story. Sword Art Online, on the other hand, sometimes feels like it changes worlds whenever the franchise needs a new expansion pack. New game, new setting, new villain, Kirito is still here, and that's really the difference. The Niu Lai movies feel like stories created because the filmmakers had something they genuinely wanted to tell. Sword Art Online increasingly feels like a franchise that discovered people would keep buying tickets and decided that was reason enough to keep opening new servers. The Niu Lai movies have spectacle, but they also have substance. They have powerful characters without making them invincible. They have emotional moments that are actually built up. They have massive action scenes that serve the story instead of trying to replace it. Sword Art Online has Kirito, and apparently for some people that's enough. For me, I'll take Niu Lai every single time. What we need are more movies like Niu Lai and fewer franchises like Sword Art Online. Not because every animated movie needs to copy Chinese mythology, have giant dragon fights, or spend half its runtime throwing increasingly ridiculous amounts of animation at the screen. The point is that Niu Lai feels like something made because its creators actually had a story they wanted to tell. It has an identity. It has a clear creative vision. It knows what it wants to be, and it commits to it. We need more movies willing to take risks instead of endlessly recycling whatever already made money 10 years ago. More stories that use mythology, history, and different cultures to create worlds we haven't seen 1,000 times before. More original ideas. More filmmakers asking, what can we do that people haven't already watched 50 times? Because eventually, audiences get tired of the same thing. That's where franchises like Sword Art Online become exhausting. At some point, how many more times are we supposed to be excited by another virtual world, another major threat, another storyline built around Kirito being uniquely qualified to solve the problem? A franchise can only keep rearranging the furniture for so long before people realize they're still sitting in the same room. Niu Lai proves that audiences are willing to show up for something different. You don't have to rely entirely on an existing brand name. You don't have to spend years building an enormous franchise before telling a complete story. And you certainly don't need to keep dragging the same characters through increasingly unnecessary adventures just because the logo still sells merchandise. Give people something new. Give them characters worth caring about, a world with its own identity, and a story that actually feels like it has somewhere to go. Make something because there's a reason for it to exist beyond, well, the last one made money, so I guess we're doing this again. That's the difference between expanding a story and simply expanding a franchise. Niu Lai feels like a story that grew into something huge because people connected with it. Sword Art Online often feels like something huge that keeps growing because nobody wants to turn off the money printer. And honestly, I know which approach I'd rather see more of. And honestly, this is something I think Sword Art Online fans should consider. Broaden your horizons. There's an entire world of animation out there, and you don't have to spend your life rewatching the same show for the 500th time while insisting that this time you're definitely going to notice the hidden genius. I understand having a favorite series. Everyone has something they love revisiting. But at some point, you have to ask yourself whether you're watching Sword Art Online again because you genuinely want to experience the story, or because you've become so comfortable inside the franchise that you don't want to try anything else. Because there is so much more out there. Watch Chinese animation. Watch Korean animation. Watch an obscure indie movie. Watch something from a genre you normally ignore. Try a story from a completely different culture. You might discover something that makes you realize you've been eating the exact same meal for years when there was an entire buffet sitting right next to you. And that's part of what makes the Niu Lai movie such a good example. If you only ever watch the same handful of mainstream Japanese anime, you might never even give them a chance. You could miss out on incredible animation, mythology, characters, and stories simply because they aren't part of the franchise you already know. Sword Art Online isn't the entire anime industry. It isn't the peak of storytelling, and it certainly isn't the only thing worth watching just because Kirito has been following you around for the last decade. There are thousands of stories out there with completely different ideas, worlds, characters, and creative styles. So maybe instead of rewatching Aincrad again and preparing for your 500th defense of why the fairy dance arc is actually misunderstood, try something new. Watch Niu Lai. Watch something weird. Watch something you know absolutely nothing about. Who knows? You might actually find another series you enjoy. And the best part is, you don't have to stop liking Sword Art Online to do it. Broadening your horizons doesn't mean betraying your favorite franchise. It just means accepting that the world of animation is much bigger than one black-haired guy with two swords. Kirito will still be there when you get back, unfortunately. So overall, if I had to pick between Niu Lai and Sword Art Online, Niu Lai wins. And honestly, it isn't even a difficult decision. One is a bizarre, low-budget animated movie made by a mother and son duo with almost no promotion, no massive production team, and barely any resources. The other is a gigantic multimedia franchise with years of professional production, enormous amounts of money, and every possible advantage you could ask for. And somehow, I would still rather watch the cow. Niu Lai is flawed, but that's part of what makes it entertaining. It has personality, it has an incredible story behind its creation. It became popular through word of mouth rather than being shoved in front of audiences by a massive marketing campaign. People can laugh at it, criticize it, and still genuinely appreciate the effort that went into making it. Sword Art Online, meanwhile, has had every opportunity to become something great. It has had the budget, the talent, the time, the audience, and the resources. Yet after all these years, I'm still more entertained by the story of two people making a bizarre cow movie than I am by another Sword Art Online installment. Niu Lai didn't need to convince me that it was great, it just needed to exist. Sword Art Online has spent years trying to convince me that it's great, and that's why, any day of the week, I'll take the cow. Maybe the unexpected success of Niu Lai will actually encourage its creators to make more movies. And honestly, I kind of hope they do, because the idea of an entire Niu Lai cinematic universe is hilarious. Imagine this tiny mother and son production somehow turning into a massive franchise. First we get Niu Lai, then Niu Lai 2, then some completely unnecessary spin-off about a supporting cow that nobody asked for. Give it a few years and we'll have Niu Lai, the final moo, Niu Lai, Rise of the Cow, and an emotionally devastating prequel, explaining the tragic childhood of the original cow. Then they'll announce a crossover movie where the cow has to save the universe from some completely unrelated threat. and everyone will sit there wondering how the hell we got here. And the funniest part is that it would all come from a movie that originally had almost no promotion and was made by two people. Most major franchises spend years constructing cinematic universes through carefully planned releases, interconnected stories, merchandise, and corporate strategy. Niu Lai could accidentally stumble into one because people liked the first movie enough to demand another. Honestly, if Niu Lai becomes a legitimate cinematic universe, I will have to respect it. Not because it suddenly becomes technically impressive, but because watching a low-budget cow movie evolve into a sprawling multimedia franchise would be one of the funniest outcomes imaginable. Forget the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Mu Cinematic Universe is coming. I'd much rather have a Niu Lai Cinematic Universe than another Sword Art Online universe. At least with Niu Lai, I have absolutely no idea what the next movie would even look like. You could announce Niu Lai 2 tomorrow and I wouldn't know whether we're getting another bizarre cow adventure, an entirely new animal, or some completely insane story that somehow makes the first movie look normal. That's what makes the idea so entertaining. Niu Lai has already established itself as something completely unpredictable, so expanding it could actually be fun. Give me Niu Lai 2, give me a spin-off, give me a prequel nobody asked for. Give me an unnecessarily complicated shared universe where every animal has its own interconnected storyline. I want the cow to have a 12-film character arc. Meanwhile, another Sword Art Online installment is much easier to predict. New game, new threat. Kirito becomes absurdly overpowered. Everyone stands around explaining how important the situation is, and eventually we're back to business as usual. At this point, the Sword Art Online universe feels less like an exciting fictional world and more like a subscription service that refuses to cancel itself. So yes, I'd absolutely take the Niu Lai cinematic universe. Give me the cowverse. Give me the terrible animation. Give me the bizarre plots. Give me the hand-drawn posters. Give me the mother and son production teams somehow making another feature film. At least I'd be genuinely curious to see what happens next. And if the final movie ends with every cow in the universe teaming up to defeat some interdimensional villain, I'll still have more fun watching it than another Sword Art Online movie. And that's going to wrap up this video. If you somehow made it all the way to the end, congratulations. You have officially spent a significant portion of your day listening to me explain why a low-budget cow movie is more interesting than Sword Art Online. I don't know whether that makes you a Niu Lai fan, a Sword Art Online hater, or just someone with questionable taste in entertainment. But either way, welcome. And don't worry, this definitely isn't the end of the Sword Art Online hate. There are plenty more Sword Art Online hate videos coming your way, because somehow this franchise continues to provide me with an unlimited supply of material. Every time I think I've finally run out of things to complain about, Sword Art Online manages to come back and give me another reason. So if you enjoyed watching me compare a bizarre Chinese cow movie to one of anime's biggest franchises, stick around, there is plenty more Sword Art Online criticism coming. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. And remember, Niu Lai is peak cinema.